Aloha, everyone. Welcome to GoLean6Sigma.com's webinar. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Hundreds of people have joined, and we are really excited that you're all here. Lean and Six Sigma are the go-to improvement methods used by leading organizations all over the world to delight customers, minimize costs, maximize profits, and develop better teams. And it doesn't need to be difficult to use. So we're here to make it easier for you all to build your problem-solving muscles and achieve your goals. So today's webinar is titled 5 Ways a SIPOC Helps You Understand and Improve Your Process. And our presenter is one of our managing partners, Tracy O'Rourke. Tracy has 20 years of experience helping organizations in virtually every industry achieve their goals with Lean Six Sigma. She began her career at GE as a black belt, and she's also an instructor at UCSD and SDSU. She has an MBA from Pepperdine University and a BA in English Literature from San Francisco State University. How's it going, Tracy?
Pretty good, Carlo. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. Thanks. It's a great day out here in Hawaii, and I'm sure it is in San Diego as well.
You know, it really isn't fair to talk about Hawaii and San Diego to everyone else because it might not be as good weather there.
Right on. So Tracy, as I mentioned, is an executive advisor and a managing partner with GoLean6Sigma.com. And my name is Carlo Tenwakio, and I'm a managing partner as well. So the first thing we're going to go over today is some housekeeping, and we're going to show you how to interact. So on the right side, you'll see your control panel, and you can ask a question in the question section. And we're also going to be inviting you to participate by answering some polls. So our first activity is checking out where everyone is joining us from today. So on the right side, if you wouldn't mind, please share where you're from. So we have Jeremy from Montreal, Elizabeth from Oregon, Florida, hey Corey, Halifax, Megan, Vancouver, Cork, Toronto, Paul from Oregon, Mario from Serbia, John from Fort Worth, North Massachusetts, Ronnie from New Zealand, Ron White from Olympia, and looks like we've got a really, really great mix of people. As I mentioned, hundreds of people have joined us today, so we all appreciate you taking the time to learn with us. All right, Tracy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Carlo, and thanks everybody for joining. That's actually one of my favorite parts of the webinar is hearing where everybody has been calling in from for this webinar. So thanks for joining us today. So a little bit about GoLean6Sigma.com. We try to make it easy for everyone everywhere to build their problem-solving muscle. That is our vision, and we really want to try to make it as practical and easy to understand and enjoyable to learn Lean and Six Sigma. And so we believe that complex concepts just confuse people, and we really try to just make it easy to understand and apply. So we hope you see that too. And we actually have created a place called the Bahama Bistro, which is where all of our training occurs. It's a dreamy, relaxing training facility. Who wouldn't want to go to the Bahamas to learn? It sounds enticing, right? So that's really our goal, is to make it easy for everyone everywhere. And guess what? A lot of people agree with us. These are some of our customers that have been using our products. And you can see that we've got brick and mortar, we have administrative, non-manufacturing, transactional processes. We have even industry-specific organizations from healthcare, government, education, financial services, and more. And guess why? Because organizations always have problems to solve, and they actually always need problem solvers. People that are really good at problem solving and understanding process-related root cause analysis. And so then how do we improve those? So it's really an integral habit and skill to build. And a lot of people agree that our stuff is pretty easy to understand and easy for people to apply. So what we're going to learn today is about a SIPOC. And we're really going to talk about the 5 ways a SIPOC helps you understand and improve your process. So here's some of the things we're going to talk about. What is it, first of all? how to construct one very simply, and then the 5 ways you can use a SIPOC, because what I have found in my experience is people use the SIPOC, but sometimes through the learning, they don't quite understand all of the benefits that a SIPOC can help project people understand their process. So a SIPOC is, I believe, highly underutilized. So we're going to talk about some of the ways you can use it to help you understand your process and ultimately improve your process. So we're going to talk about visualizing and communicating using a SIPOC. We're going to talk about how it helps you identify customers and the requirements, how a SIPOC can help you plan a process walk, which is a really important step that you should be doing with all of your improvement efforts, how it can help you manage detailed process mapping, and finally, identifying useful measures, not just output measures, but measures that you might use in the future to track your process improvements. So that's really the agenda. So first, let's talk about what is a SIPOC. So the joke is that SIPOC is kind of a dumb name, but it's a really good tool. It's really an acronym. It stands for suppliers, inputs, process, output, and customers. And basically what you're doing is you're identifying what those things are at a very high level. And so usually in a SIPOC, it's a bird's eye view. Picture yourself in a plane 30,000 feet above the process, and everything looks little, little cars and little trees and trucks. You're not in the weeds. And actually, this can be very hard for people who are in the weeds, they do the process every day, to step back and actually think about the high level process map. We've done SIPOCs before where people go, I don't see myself in this process. They go, oh, I'm in this one box. So that it could be interesting to, see the picture or the view of the process from that high of a level. But again, it helps you see the process and the relationships between inputs, outputs, and suppliers. It also helps you establish process boundaries. So that can help with scope, right? So the beginning, my improvement effort starts with where the process starts here and ends here. So that can be very helpful. And then also it helps you identify some key customers, which can be really important. And sometimes people don't know who their customer is. And so a SIPOC can help a great deal with that. So this is actually one of my favorite tools in the toolbox. I almost always, when I'm helping improvement teams do projects, I always use a SIPOC, and I help them get started with the SIPOC, the very first thing. It's an easy tool. It can tell you a lot about what the process is. I think the first thing people recognize is sometimes they say, well, I can't do a SIPOC. Well, sometimes that might mean that your issue that you're trying to solve isn't process related. Sometimes people say, well, it's a policy. I'm trying to change this policy. Oh, okay, so it's not a process. Not every problem you're going to run into is a process issue, or that you're going to apply DMAIC or even plan, do, check, adjust. So I think sometimes that is sometimes attempting to do a SIPOC makes you realize you actually might not be using the right approach to solve the problem. So, because a lot of people try to force process improvement when it really isn't a process issue. So that's really one of the first things that sometimes can come up when you're doing a SIPOC. So how do you build a SIPOC? Let's go through that. And this again is very brief explanation of constructing a SIPOC. So basically, like we said, it's an acronym. It stands for supplier, input, process, output, and customer. And these are the questions that are associated with the SIPOC. So often we read it from left to right. We don't typically build it that way, which I think is sometimes interesting. So let's talk about what these are first, and then we'll talk about how to build it. So first, you would identify who provides inputs into the process. So often what we find is someone wants a loan. Let's say they're trying to get approved for a mortgage or a loan, and so they're actually supplying an application or completed information into the process. So that could be the customer is a supplier. And in a lot of transactional processes, we do see customers as the supplier of something. And so who provides the things that are going into this process? And then what is the information that they are actually supplying as an input? That goes under the inputs column. Like I said earlier, an application could be an example of that. And then what is the process, right? So how is this product or service produced? So again, we say, what is the high level 30,000 foot overview of the process? So we're not going into great detail. Usually I don't see more than 8 boxes of process steps in a SIPOC. And so people say, well, what if I have more boxes? Well, you gotta zoom out is what I tell people. Remember, you're on a plane and everything looks little. And so often, you know, if someone has a process step that says send email to this person, well, that might be a little too detailed for a SIPOC. So a lot of times we are actually getting the right level set when people are developing a SIPOC. Finally, what is the output and the customer? So the output is, what's the thing coming out of the process? It could be a product, or it could be that the service is completed. So for example, if you are getting your TV fixed at home, the output might be TV is fixed, right? So that is the service that's completed. So a lot of people think, oh, this doesn't apply because I'm not manufacturing. I don't have a widget coming out of the process. But a completed service is also an output. So those are the things that we want to identify, is what is the thing coming out of the process? And finally, who receives these products or services? Who is it going to? So those are the things that you're thinking about when you're constructing a SIPOC. You're really identifying what the process is, what's going into it, what's coming out of it, who provides the inputs, and who's it going to in terms of the customer. So those are basically the construct of a SIPOC. So I said earlier, we read it from left to right when you see a SIPOC built, but often we don't start that way. So sometimes people do struggle with building a SIPOC. And so often what I see is people will start with the P, the O, or the C when they build a SIPOC. So for example, often people will say, well, what is the process that we're actually looking at anyway? And they might start right in the middle, and they might start building the steps of a process out first. And that can create some clarity. I have also seen people start with the output. They say, this is the thing that is broken. Let's figure out what the process is that this thing coming out of a process goes through. It might be an application that has come out. I just worked with a group 2 weeks ago, and it was a contract, a completed contract or an awarded contract was the output. And they wanted to understand what the process was to get that awarded. So that can create a lot of clarity for people when you actually have identified what is the thing that is specifically coming out of the process that we're hoping to improve or identify. And then finally, some people start with the customer. You know, they have a customer that's very upset, and they say, you know, this is the customer that we really want to focus on, and this is the things that they're receiving out of the process. So sometimes we work all the way back from the customer and then try to build the SIPOC that way. And so there's no wrong way or even right way to do it. Ultimately, start where you think it's going to be easiest for your team to put this together. And I've seen people start in all those different places. And I've actually even seen people start with supplier too. So take a stab at it. When we do these in training, constructing a SIPOC, this actually does not take very long. It could take maybe 30 minutes to put one together as long as you have the right people. And again, it's so high level that leaders don't have a problem doing this, or managers or even high-level executives don't have problems with constructing a SIPOC. Actually, who I think struggles with the SIPOC is the people that are very detailed and work in the process and have a lot of detail in their process. Sometimes they have a harder time putting together the SIPOC. So this seems to work very easily, though, for people that are supervisory level, management, those kinds of things for constructing a SIPOC. So now that you understand what a SIPOC is and the basics on how to construct a SIPOC, let's talk about why you'd want to do it. Let's talk about what it can do for you. So the first one is it can, first of all, help you communicate the high-level process that you're actually looking to improve. So here is an example from our training at the Bahama Bistro of a SIPOC. It's the lunch order to delivery. So you can see that this is a completed SIPOC. You've got your suppliers, your patrons supply a lunch order. The grocery, farmer, vendors, distributors supply food ingredients and raw food and spices. Then we have paper goods manufacturers that supply packaging, bags, cardboard holders, those kinds of things. And again, this is the lunch order to delivery pickup process. So the process is that the customer arrives or calls, we take the order, we deliver it to the kitchen, we prep it, make it, and cook it to order, we package it, and then we deliver the order or pick it up. They pick it up. So what's the output? The delivered lunch order. And who does it go to? The lunch patron. So that's an example of a basic SIPOC. And again, why this isn't important is not, as I said earlier, not every problem is process related. And so first of all, it's a good check for you to see if this is actually a process issue. But then also think about the thousands of processes that exist in an organization. I've done a lot of work with lots of organizations, but I will say that I worked for a government agency. It was actually a state, and they wanted to understand all of their administrative processes within this certain department. And we did SIPOCs for all of their processes. We did 110 of them, 110 SIPOCs. So when you think about process improvement and you're trying to communicate what process you're trying to improve, SIPOCs work really well to explain what process you're looking to improve. And it helps to have a problem statement. And executives get it. They look at a SIPOC and they get it and they like it. When you put a detailed map in front of an executive, that might not be the best tool to communicate with. They might glaze over or not sure what they're looking at, or they may not want to spend the time to know in great detail what this process is. So a lot of times executives don't want to get lost in the details. So a SIPOC speaks to their level, but it also helps you get grounded with your team in terms of what process that you're really trying to impact, who is being served by that process. And so it helps ground people to see that there is a larger process. So it helps you communicate with higher level executives, with your boss about what process that you're trying to improve, but it also helps you communicate with your team with what process that you've really determined that you're going to be looking at as part of this process. So it helps you communicate it, and it helps others understand what process is that you're trying to work on as well. So that's the very first thing that a SIPOC can help you do. And I really, I believe that when you're working on a charter for your project, an improvement project, it's got your problem statement and your goal statement. I think a SIPOC is a great first thing that you do, that you build with your charter, because I think it can help create a lot of clarity on what you're trying to address with process improvement. I think it's a great tool to work with your leader. Like if your leader says, I have a project for you, I think you should look at improving a process, and you want to get a better understanding of what this process is, build a SIPOC with the leader. And again, they're pretty good at, helping with this communication and at that high level. So that's the very first thing a SIPOC can do, is improve communication around the process that you're trying to improve. The second thing that a SIPOC will do to help you understand the process is it's a great thing to do in terms of understanding customer requirements. So I will say that SIPOC is an acronym, and sometimes people will add an R at the end of a SIPOC, so it's SIPOCer. And that is really saying, don't forget to get the customer requirements. So this is really important for organizations, especially if there's a lot of confusion around who the customer is. And you'd be surprised at how many organizations are confused around the customer, their customers. So let me first start by looking at this example we have. So again, identifying customers and requirements. So we already did the SIPOC for the Bahama Bistro, the lunch order to delivery process. We've identified that the customer is the lunch patron. So what does the customer require from this process for lunch order to delivery? And it is lunchtime somewhere in the United States. As a matter of fact, it's going to be lunchtime for me soon. I'm going to get hungry. And so this, you can visualize, what might the customer want from their delivered lunch order? Well, they want it to be accurate. They want it to be on time. They don't want to wait too long. Actually, I hate that, especially when I'm in a rush for lunch and I'm waiting a really long time for my order. Then I don't even have time to eat. I actually had a situation where I ended up having to just tell them pack it to go because I didn't even have a time to eat one bite. I had to leave because it took too long. We also want our food at the right, level of heat. We want to deliver it at 100. We may not say deliver it at 155 to 160 degrees, but we actually do know when it's not hot enough. And so we may not know what the translation of that is in heat, but we do know when it's not cold enough, when it's not hot enough. And then again, we want it to be available. So don't you hate it when you go to your favorite restaurant and they don't have your favorite item available ever? That drives me nuts too. So these are some of the requirements that a customer would have. And it's a great exercise for a project team to really think about who is the customer and what do they really care about. Surprisingly, you would be surprised how many teams don't do that. They don't think about who the customer is and what their requirements are. So there's 2 steps to identifying customer requirements. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it on this particular webinar, but it's good to identify the category that the customer cares about: accuracy, on time, soup. I guess that would be the soup temperature, and then available. And then you really want to say, so what does accuracy mean here in this particular process? What does on time mean in this particular process? Because in those 110 maps I told you that I did for an organization, lead time or cycle time was pretty much a category in almost every one of those, but the definition of that lead time was different for almost every process, right? So as an example here, delivery in 16 minutes or less, or 20 minutes or less for entrees. So these are very specific things. Customers want their salad, as an example, in 16 minutes or less. That is the target. They don't want to wait longer than that. And so identifying what does on time mean for the customer in this process is a really important exercise for your team to go through, because if you're going to make an improvement to this process, hopefully it affects the customer in a good way. And so that's why it's really important to identify customers and requirements, because we do want people on the team to be customer focused. We tend to be department centric sometimes. We tend to improve the processes to make it better for us, our own department, but sometimes we actually sub-optimize the process and make it worse for the customer. So we don't want that to happen. So identifying customers and requirements is key. And, here's the other thing. You ever have a situation where 2 departments don't like each other? Guess what? When you do a SIPOC, sometimes you discover that one of them is actually a customer. And you know what? They're tired of hearing from the customer. Or it could be that, so this happens too. Someone makes an improvement and they go, yay, the process is better. And then the people downstream say, no, you didn't make it better. You just pushed that work to us. You actually just pushed it to us. So you took it off your plate, but you just handed it to somebody else. That's really not process improvement. And so that's why if you identify customers and the requirements and you look to make it better, one of their requirements, it eliminates the pushing the bubble of work to other people, because guess what? You made an improvement in your department, but it had no downstream effect. So that's also a great check for process improvement teams. Are you actually making the process better, or are you just pushing the work to somebody else? I'm sure many of you have had that happen before. Okay, another opportunity is, I've run into organizations, again, like I've told you, they don't know who the customer is. So I always tell people, always identify customers by process, because you'll find that you may be a customer of one process, but a stakeholder of another process. So if you do it by process, you get more clarity on who the customer is for that process and what they require. So that brings me to the next slide, which is a little bit about definitions. And because what I've also found is there are different definitions out there for customers and stakeholders. And I'm not saying they're wrong, because I'm sure it serves them well. Like, I know that in project management, they don't define the customer this way. There's a different definition for customers. But for process improvement, these definitions serve the process very well. So a customer is typically anyone who uses or receives a service or product from a process. They get the thing coming out of the process, or they actually use it, or they actually go through the process. So that is a customer. A stakeholder is any individual or group that has a vested interest in how the process performs, but doesn't receive anything out of the process or use the product or service. So there are a lot of stakeholders, for example, in government. And so they're always, they're always overseeing the process, and there's a lot of oversight in these processes. And the sad part is a lot of those processes are designed for the stakeholders, not the customers. And so I feel like when I work with a lot of government organizations, I'm reminding them of, you have to serve both. You have to serve stakeholder requirements and customer requirements. And that is, to me, the creative question that needs to be answered, is how do you serve both stakeholders and customers in government processes? Because you can't just serve one. And people really like it. I think that they really have gotten a lot of traction in some of the processes I've seen with identifying who the customer is and trying to fulfill those requirements better. And then we finally have process partners. Process partners are basically groups, agencies, entities that work together to provide a product or service to the customer. So you're not the customer of another department. You actually are a partner working together. And so you always see situations where two departments hate each other when really they're partners. They got a partner. They have to have some aligned metrics to say, okay, this defines success for both of us. How do we make sure we're delivering this in this fashion? And so, that can be a constant challenge as well. But I think the definitions are really important to make sure people understand who is the customer, who is the stakeholder, and do we have process partners? And that can help a lot with some of the dialogues about what requirements are the most important. So that is the second thing a SIPOC can help you do, is to understand the process, is defining who the customer is and what they require. So we're moving on to the third thing that SIPOCs can help you do, and that is plan a process walk. So this might not be something you've heard before, but I have found over the years when I develop and am helping organizations plan a process walk, I bring out the SIPOC. I bring out the SIPOC and I say, okay, here's the process that we're going to be walking. Who are we going to interview? So if you're not familiar with a process walk yet, we actually have we have 2 webinars specifically on the golean6sigma.com website that can help you understand what a process walk is a little bit more. You can just go to the search feature and put in webinar process walk and it will come up. But a process walk basically is when you physically go to where the work occurs, you see the work happen, and you actually interview people that do the process to help understand and build profound knowledge of the process. And so typically, not only are the people, so I think the important thing to remember here is the people that you interview are also walking the process with you. So for example, if you're interviewing, the Bahama Bistro and you want to interview the person taking the call, then you interview them and then they get up and walk with you for the rest of the process too. So people that you interview also walk the process with you. And I think people forget that. They miss that part. So SIPOCs can be great and an easy way to help you plan a process walk. So for example, here is our SIPOC that we use for the Bahama Bistro, the lunch order to delivery process. And you might sit down with a group of people early on to say, okay, we're going to plan a process walk. We're actually going to walk this process and see it in action. Who should we interview? Well, who are the people that do these steps? And then you might actually have a few people that you've identified and you say, okay, well, let's list them and then let's figure out who we're going to use. So you might say, okay, well, we actually, it'd be great to talk to a customer. Because, you know, sometimes with process walks, it's great to hear the customer. It really helps people get focused on the customer. But again, some people are concerned. They say, I don't want customers to see how broken our process is. And, you know, they don't have to go the entire thing. You know, customers have always, a lot of times when you've identified a partner, they're totally supportive of being interviewed. So you might identify a regular customer and you say, hey, do you mind if we ask you a couple of questions about our process? We're trying to improve it. So you might say, oh, Julius, he's a great customer. Let's interview him. So now who typically takes the order and delivers it to the kitchen? So again, you're sort of brainstorming the people that actually do this process. And you go, oh, let's talk to Elizabeth, right? And so the criteria is going to change. You know, are they available to be talked to? How long have they been here? You know, are they, you know, do they want to participate? You know, there's lots of things that you would do and to figure out who these people are that you might talk to. And then we're going to talk to Carlo because, you know, he works every day, especially during the primetime busy hours. And that's when we seem to be having issues. So maybe he has a lot of insight for us. And then we're going to talk to Anna for packaging the order and delivering the order. So this can really help you organize the interviews for a process walk. Yes, you can have more than one person if you want to interview them, but a SIPOC is a great way to get a bird's eye view and organize this process walk. So I will say this, I have had people say, well, let's just identify the departments. So that, you know, Elizabeth, you know, they may not identify Elizabeth per se, but they might say, oh, well, Lynn, she's the manager. We'll just talk to her. I always kind of drive towards who specifically is going to potentially be interviewed, because what ends up happening is if you don't identify the very specific people to be interviewed and you just leave it up to the manager to decide, guess what happens? Sometimes the manager waits to the last minute and they go, oh, let me just see who's working today. And the person who's being interviewed gets 5-minute notice. So, and that feels disrespectful and it feels unorganized. So I would highly recommend finding out who is going to be interviewed as early as possible and making sure that they're involved in the communication, they know what's happening, because I've seen it more times than I'd like to admit where people were not notified and they just, now there's 7 people staring at them and they have to walk through their process, and that doesn't feel good. So SIPOCs are a great way to help you organize to do a process walk. Okay, so the fourth thing that a SIPOC can help you do, SIPOCs help you manage detailed process mapping. So process improvement is hard work. It really is. And the reason why it's hard work, it could be fun, but it's hard work because most of the time people are thinking in a way they don't normally have to think every day, right? They're working in the process normally, and now we're working on the process. You know, a lot of people have been doing their job for a long time and they know what to do. They know it like the back of their hand. They actually don't even have to think. But when you work on the process, that's a lot of work. When we do process walks, people say, wow, that was exhausting, because they're actually doing something they're not familiar with, and it expends more energy for people. So the goal is you want to be as efficient and effective as possible when you do process improvement. You don't want to waste people's time, because guess what? They're not going to want to participate anymore if you feel like you're wasting their time, or if you feel like it wasn't very productive. So we want to make sure we're not draining people. And I'm seeing this method happen a lot, is people say, well, let's map out the whole process. And I call it marathon mapping. And that's when we decide we want to map out the entire process in great detail. And I'm not necessarily sure that that is required. So what I think can be helpful is if you do a SIPOC first and you walk the process, and then you identify through the process walk that there are certain areas of the process that need to be detailed out more, you can hone in on that particular step in the process and map that out in great detail. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to map out the entire process. The other thing is, sometimes you have no control over certain aspects of a process. So why are you going to detail map that out? And if you don't have those people involved, they're going to tell you it's wrong anyway. So if you are going to map out the entire process, it does require a lot of resources, and it does require the right people there. I'm not saying that mapping out the whole process is a bad idea. I mean, there have been times where it's been a great thing to do, but I just would say make sure you're mapping it when it makes sense. Don't do marathon mapping. I just actually had a situation where someone said, I want to improve these processes, and I want to map out in detail all of the processes first. I go, well, why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want, because that's sort of like batching process mapping. Why wouldn't you map one and improve it, map another, then improve it, map another, then improve it? That's what we call single piece flow application of process improvement. You know, you map it and then use it right away to improve the process. If you map out in great detail and it takes a long time and you don't use it right away, what happens? The map is obsolete when you go to use it, and you got to redo it anyway. So I would recommend, if you're going to detail map in great detail for improvement, map it out and use it right away, because it's going to change. It'll change. Somebody will leave, and now the process is different. A new manager, a process change, a policy change, a technology change. Something's going to change, and you're going to have to redo it. So detail map right away, use it. So that's my recommendation. So SIPOCs can help you manage some of that. After you do the walk, you'd say, okay, what step do we really need to detail map out, and who do we need there to make sure it's right? Hopefully that will help. So let me ask you a question. This is our first poll. And that poll is, have you participated in a marathon mapping session before? It's simple, yes or no on this one. So I'm going to launch the poll and go ahead and answer it.
And while we'll answering that poll, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the questions area on the right sidebar, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. If we don't get to all of your questions, we'll have them published on the website, but just be assured that we'll get to every question that is submitted. And there will also be a recording as well. If you can, check out the webinar recording on our website in a few days. If you'd like to share it with any of your colleagues or just watch the session again, it'll be available then.
Yes. And I'd love to hear, if you want to write in the question window, what was it like for the marathon mapping? Was it a good experience? Because I'm not saying that they can't be good experiences. Or was it a bad experience? Would you have done it differently? If you just want to comment on that in the question window, please feel free. And I'm going to check on your comments a little bit later. I'll give you a few minutes to maybe type something out, because we'd love to hear how things are going with that. But again, these tools, they work great. SIPOCs work great. DMAIC is awesome. Six Sigma is awesome. Lean's awesome. And the tools really do work. However, sometimes the way they're used or the way things are implemented can get in the way, and it can be challenging. For example, 5S. Most of you probably know what 5S is. It's workplace organization. If you don't, and you're trying to make things organized, especially in shared spaces, and maybe, I've heard situations where organizations basically want you to put blue tape squares on your desk so that you know where the stapler goes. And what's the point of that if nobody else is using your desk besides you? Right? So, sometimes these things are applied and they go awry. And so ultimately they work great. And so how do we make sure we're using them effectively? All right, so the poll says marathon mapping session, right down the middle for the most part. 52% said yes, they've participated in marathon mapping, and no, 48% said no, that they didn't. So Elizabeth wrote, multiple process mapping sessions were draining, but worthwhile to see how complex processes overlapped. Good, so I'm glad that there was some benefit there, because I think that could be really helpful too. Thank you for sharing, Elizabeth. Tegan, or is it Tegan, said it can provide very obvious areas for improvement after the process is reviewed in great detail. This is true. Sometimes if people just don't understand how complicated the process is, marathon mapping really can show that. That's for sure. Jean wrote, it was bad. Much of the detail we mapped was thrown out to get a higher level map. It was a waste of time. So thank you, Jean, for sharing. So again, really, if you have this idea that you want a marathon map or detail map out, really make adjustments if you're finding that the team is not seeing value in it or it's not helping. Bridget wrote, I think the team lost excitement because it took so long to actually see the process improve. Exactly. So if you're spending more than 3 days mapping, I'd say relook at how you're spending your time. 3 days is a lot of time to be detail mapping out. So, and I find that people they just are they're out of juice after that time. So thank you for sharing.
That's really helpful,
So
Tracy. One other thing that I'd like to just share is if anyone is interested in a SIPOC template and a bunch of other templates that we have for free on our website, you can check out the resources button in the navigation menu. And we have hundreds of free templates, guides, other tools, and webinars. So check that out if you have a chance. And then that will also be linked on the webinar post where the recording and the slides will be after Tracy's presentation today.
Thank you, Carlo. Yes, we have a SIPOC template that is very easy to use, and people really like it a lot. So the last thing a SIPOC can help you do, and there's actually a few more, but I had to cut it loose at least a little bit. These are the top 5 ways I see SIPOC being used. Identifying useful measures in the process. So I think where people struggle a lot is how you measure stuff, right? They say, oh, it's bad. Well, how bad is it? We don't know. It's just bad because people complain all the time. And so a SIPOC can be a great way to identify measures that could be helpful in your process. So this is the same SIPOC I shared earlier, selecting measures at the Bahama Bistro. And these are all things that potentially could be measured in the process. So I1 stands for input. It's an input measure. P1 is a process measure, and O1 is an output measure, right? So you might be looking at, for the customer, the customer cares about how fast it took, the order lead time, and how many defects there were. So, that we didn't match their order, or we didn't get their order right, or something like that. So some of the, I would say leading indicators or upstream measures, if you will, are the process measures for cycle time, right? So if we care about order lead time, P2 through P5 are probably measures that are going to affect that, right? So those are leading indicators. So if you're taking a long time to prepare the food, guess what? You're probably not going to meet the lead time for the customer. So identifying measures in the process that can be useful, I think, can be very helpful. People don't necessarily, or you identify, we really need to measure, from P1 to P5 to really understand lead time. And currently we only measure P4 and P5. So identifying measures are very helpful, and then actually selecting those measures. So sometimes these measures don't exist. Sometimes you say, you know what, we have nothing right now that measures this. And this happened many times in a lot of places. I'm working with a group for procurement purchases. They actually don't have the ability to measure from when they receive a proposal to when it gets advertised, as an example. And so they're working on it. But that is the true customer experience. I had another organization, a financial organization, that every department measured their own lead time, but nobody measured from start to finish. And so everybody said, oh, we're hitting our measures, our internal department measures. Everybody said that. Well, why is the customer so mad then? So something wasn't right. And then we found out that if a department got an activity to work on, an application, and it was rerouted to them incorrectly, they would send it back to be rerouted to the right department, and the clock would start over because they didn't want to punish any of the departments. But guess what? Who's being punished? The customer. The customer was so mad because there was no urgency around these reroutes. And in their mind, they're like, well, I don't want to get dinged for that. Well, who cares? Just fix it, right? The customer cares. So a SIPOC could have identified, interesting. I mean, we've got these very specific departmental measures, but no measure to actually measure the whole process and the customer experience. So that can really show up on a SIPOC too. And sometimes an action item is, we got to create this measure, or they actually find out it does exist, it is available, but nobody knew, and now they can add that to their dashboard. So this could be a really helpful thing that SIPOC can help you do, is identify useful measures in the process for not only improvement or process performance, but also for control and monitoring plans. So that is pretty much the last thing that I'm going to share about how a SIPOC can help you understand your process and improve it. So how many of you have used a SIPOC before in these ways? And this is just going to be in the question window now. So go ahead and type in the question window. Have you done A? Have you done B, C, D, E? Or are you going to try to do one of these things? We'd love to hear what some of your feedback is. And so I think the hard part is that there's a lot of tools that you can use out there. And I always like to say, don't just check the box on using a tool. What did you learn? What did you learn from using that tool about the current state? You know, the very first thing that you do in process improvement, your very first step, besides identifying and honing in on a problem statement, is build profound knowledge of the current state. What's going on with the current state? That's why we do a current state map. That's why we do a current state SIPOC. That's why we try to measure it. That's why we talk to the customer. There's all these things, all these actions, and they're all geared around understanding current state. And that's why you build a detailed map too. And so I've had people build SIPOC sitting at their desk and build detailed maps sitting at their desk. And I say, well, who'd you talk to? Well, nobody. Well, what'd you learn? Well, I didn't really learn anything. Okay, start over. So that's really the key here, is what did you learn? So Janelle says, I've never used a SIPOC. And so hopefully maybe now, Janelle, you will. I hope you see that there's some value that you could use with using that. And she says, yes, I will now. I will do the SIPOC in the future. Thank you. Good. All but E in the past. Going to add E. Tail, I love it. C, D, and E from Howard. A, B, and C from Mike. I've never used it prior, is what Jean said, but I need to do a better job to get a view of the high level process. Great. That's great. Let's see, what else do we have here? All of the above for Daryl. A plus, Daryl, you've used it all the ways. Great job. Now go tell others and help them learn. Will it be possible to have a copy of this webinar? Yes, Reza, you can get a copy. It'll be on our website. I've used SIPOC to manage detailed mapping, is what a sim says. And I've often used the SIPOC for myself as a business analysis to quickly understand the business. This is from Victoria. Thank you very much. That's helpful. And I've not used it for E. Well, good. I hope this was helpful for you. Again, like I said, SIPOC is one of my favorite tools, and I think it's the most underutilized tool that there is in the toolbox. So today we covered what a SIPOC is, how to construct it, and the 5 ways that you can use a SIPOC to help you better understand your process and ultimately improve it. I hope you felt like this webinar was worthwhile, and we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions specifically about this particular webinar. And while you're thinking about your questions, go ahead and put them in the question window. I'm going to share some more information, and then we'll get back to answering some of these questions. So first of all, if you want to learn more, I would say get started with some of our training. We have a yellow belt training that is free. And it's, you know, all you need is to put in is your email and you get access to the training for free. The certification, there's a certain amount of money for that, but you have access to free 8 hours of training. We also have our green belt training, our black belt, and our lean. And because you attended the webinar, you get a coupon of 20% off on any of our main courses. So expires on Halloween, or if you don't believe in Halloween, October 31st. So go ahead and take advantage, because that's not available. That discount is not available for everybody. We also have another upcoming webinar that Elizabeth is going to be facilitating, how to build a powerful project storyboard. So again, this is for your green belt or your black belt project. And I'll just say that we see a lot of storyboards come through, and some of them are very long. You know, so we actually had to shorten it, but we had people sending in project storyboards that were very long. And so ultimately building a powerful project storyboard about, you know, knowing your audience and what are those elements that you should be putting in there, and how do you share your findings in a very compelling way, is what we're going to be talking about on this webinar. We also have a new podcast out. I got the pleasure of interviewing Ashley Gambier. She is the Senior Director at UC San Diego. And guess what? UCSD is actually practicing what they teach with Lean Six Sigma. They have an internal Lean Six Sigma initiative. They're looking to reduce waste and making their processes more simplified. And Ashley is also leading the effort to start to put it at UCSD Medical Center. And so it was really interesting talking with her. And if you want to hear about the podcast, go ahead and check it out on our website.
Hey, Tracy, I listened to that one and I really, really enjoyed it. I think a lot of people who are implementing Lean Six Sigma inside of their organizations will find it super helpful also. There's lots of tips and techniques that Ashley used that she shared with you, and I'm really excited for other people to hear them.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so let's hear some questions. So I see one from Daryl. Have you used a template that captures suppliers and inputs and outputs and customers for each step? If so, do you find it harder to teach? So, you know, it really does. It's a great question, Daryl. And we've actually spent a lot of time on suppliers and inputs and outputs and customers. And so what ends up happening is the input list gets really long. But I have to be honest, it is harder to teach, but I think that the important question is, why are you doing it? And, you know, I have been in situations where teams have felt like the input that they're getting to go to put through the process there's a lot of problems with it. And so ultimately they try to attack it more upstream. So for example, I work with an insurance agency, an organization that it was an insurance company. So basically, if your company has health insurance, they have to transfer everybody in your company over to this new insurance company. And it was that process. And once this company signed up, like, okay, I'm switching to you guys for our insurance for all of our employees, they would send over a 21-page application that had to be completed. And it was never complete. It was always missing information. It took days to fill out. There was a lot of confusion. And so a big part of the project ended up being, what inputs do we need exactly? Because what ended up happening is there was a lot of stuff that just kept getting added that really wasn't important. It was, well, we have it just in case this happens. Well, when was the last time that happened? In 1922. So it's like, we really don't need to ask every single person for that if we could just ask for it if it does happen. So, and there's a lot of stuff on there. So I hope that helped with the answer.
Great, Tracy. Thanks for that. So Andrew had a question, and his question was, how do you check that you are doing a SIPOC at the right level?
That is a great question. And I'd say that the dead giveaway is, I always build a SIPOC with Post-its. And the dead giveaway is you start to have too many steps, right? So I'd say it's as simple as, don't have more than 8 Post-its. If you've got more than 8 Post-its, you need to start looking at a different level. And so, and actually, you actually do need to let people do that on their own, because then what I say is, I go, okay, this Post-it, these 3 Post-its, you know, so they're taking the information, they're entering it in the computer, and then they're getting approval. Name this activity? It's 3 steps right now, but what are they doing in this as one activity? Oh, they're confirming it. Okay, great. That's the new name of these 3 steps. So I think sometimes it's, you let them go down the path and you say, okay, remember, it's only supposed to be 8 steps. So you need to roll out or zoom out a little bit more. Or what I start doing is I start combining the steps. I hope that helps.
It's really helpful, Tracy. So Chris has a question, and he asks, can a SIPOC build a process that doesn't currently exist, or is it more of an as-is improvement tool?
You know what? That is a great question. And, process improvement in itself is supposed to be on existing processes. But I have to be honest, I have used a SIPOC in exactly the way you're saying, Chris, a process that didn't exist that needed to get built. And what we end up doing is exactly that, is we design it at a high level, and then we get agreement at the high level, at the SIPOC level, and then we can move forward with building the detailed steps of what will occur for each of those steps. So I almost feel like it's almost absolutely needed when you're looking at designing a new process. So I would say, yes, you can use it for that too.
Great. If anyone has any other questions, we have a few minutes remaining. So go ahead and enter them into the question box on the right.
Okay, great. All right. Do we have any more questions? It doesn't look like it. That's okay. I guess I answered them all. All right, well then I'm going to take this as an opportunity to say thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming to the webinar. If you guys have any more questions, please contact us at golean6sigma.com. As Carlo had mentioned earlier, we have lots of free tools, templates. We have webinars on process walks. We have all kinds of podcasts, and we just want to try to make it easy for everyone everywhere to build a problem-solving muscle. And so we just have a lot of free stuff on our website, and you should take advantage of it if you haven't already. So thanks for joining us. Carlo, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Nope, I think that was great. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. If you have any suggestions for webinars as well, please leave them in the survey that you're going to get at the end, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.